Hello everybody and welcome to a new video. This is going to be episode 2 of the Queen Chronicles, the series where we talk about everything Queen. If you haven't watched episode 1 and you don't know what this is going to be about, just click on this. I explain it a lot better there. On this episode we're going to talk about an integral part of Queen's sound, the legendary Vox AC30. I actually had to go back and check to see which one was born first, the AC30 or Brian May's guitar, but the AC30 actually had it beat. Now, you've actually seen and heard the AC30 way more times than you can think of. The AC30 was actually the amplifier of choice of the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Creed, Radiohead, Tom Petty, U2. So yeah, it's definitely a legendary amplifier. And one of my top 3 all-time favorites. So the AC30 actually has a really interesting story, so I'm going to share it with you guys. Now, for you to actually understand how important the AC30 was, we have to go all the way back to 1951. Back then, in 1951, they had instituted a ban on all imports from USA to the UK. And that meant that you couldn't really get any American-made guitars or amplifiers there. So forget about getting any Gibson guitars or any Fender guitars or amplifiers there. And that ban was actually instituted from 1951 to 1959. So in that time period, a lot of stuff was starting to get built in the UK. Okay, so let's fast forward to 1957. In 1957, there was a company called Jennings Musical Instruments, and the amp designer there was Dick Denny. Dick Denny was actually a World War II veteran, and he was actually going deaf because of all the explosions that he had heard during the war. And he was actually a jazz guitar player, but because his condition was getting worse, he started working on an amplifier that was going to be loud enough so he could hear himself play. Now this part is actually really interesting. At the time that he was working on this amplifier, he was also working on the first AC30. Now the AC30 back then was way different from the AC30 we know today. It was actually built and engineered for electric organ players. As you can see on the catalog from back in 1958, it looked a lot different than what it looks like today. But Denny actually borrowed a lot of the components from the original AC30 and he came up with a new guitar-oriented AC15. Now, because of the fact that he was actually working on parallel on that organ amplifier and his own guitar amplifier, he actually borrowed a lot of parts and components from that original AC30 to use on his all-new guitar amplifier, the AC115. So I think this is a great time to tell you that if you like Queen and you like the content you see, make sure you destroy that like button, drop me a comment in the comment section down below, and of course subscribe to this channel like a man if you haven't yet. And hey, if you want to become a part of the team and you want to support the channel, make sure you hit that join button down there. A little goes a long way. Now the organ amplifier, the AC230, didn't really get any orders at all, so they stopped advertising it in March of 1958, and there was no more production of that model. Now back then, a lot of amplifier manufacturers were actually experimenting with AC current and DC current. So they really wanted to show the fact that this was an amplifier that worked on alternate current, or AC, and was not going to kill you. So he included that in the name. And then the numbers 15, 30, and then 50 actually meant the amount of wattage that the amplifier had. And the number before or after the slash was actually the amount of channels that the amplifier had. So yeah, by late 1958, the AC115 had become immensely popular amongst guitar players, and it was especially loved by Hank Marvin, who was the guitar player for The Shadows, who was a huge band back then. But the AC115 had one drawback: it wasn't loud enough. Can you imagine? That thing is so loud, it's ridiculous. But yeah, back then there was no stage monitors, and the fans were crazy. Just go on YouTube and look for the fans going crazy over the Beatles or Elvis. You'll see fans in the 50s were crazy. So yeah, Hank Marvin actually asked Jennings for something that was loud enough so that he could hear himself play over the fans. So in late 1959, the new unimproved AC30 came out. Now this AC30 actually came out of the factory equipped with one 12-inch Goodman speaker. Since Jennings wanted the AC30 to be cost effective and he didn't really know if he was going to get a lot of orders for it, he wanted to use the same chassis as the AC15. So he had to be the same size and roughly about the same weight because he felt that that was the most that a guitar player should hold around. Then in New Year's Eve 1960, the all-new AC30/4 came out. Now this one actually featured 2 different inputs and 2 channels per input, making it a total of 4, hence the 4 after the slash. But it still had the one 12-inch speaker configuration. Now, if you've actually been paying attention to the video, then you probably remember that there was a ban on imports in the UK from 1951 to 1959. So that meant that now in 1960 that ban was over, and a lot of American-made amplifiers actually made it to the UK. So in order for the AC30 to compete with the newly imported Fender Twin, they decided to make an AC30 Twin, and that's when the AC30 with 2 speakers finally came out. And on the beginning they were actually still using the Goodman speakers, but only a few months later they actually started working with Celestion and started using Celestion Blues. Okay, so that takes us to 1961. This year is very important for Vox AC30s. This is the year they came up with a top boost. Now, a lot of people don't really understand what a top boost is, but it's basically, essentially, just that. A boost on the top end frequencies. And that meant that your guitar would actually cut through the mix a lot better without necessarily having to have so much volume. And a lot of people really like that, because now you didn't really need to have all that much volume in order to cut through the mix, meaning that you would save a ton on tubes or valves, and of course you would save your eardrums a lot. Now, the top boost was actually first offered as a factory mod, which meant that when you ordered the amplifier, you would have to specify that you actually wanted the top boost added to it, and you would have to pay a premium for it. And later it was actually shipped to the stores as a separate unit, so if the customer wanted to add it to the amplifier, you could have a technician do it for them. The 1964 Vox AC30 is widely regarded as the best Vox ever. This amplifier actually featured 3 different channels with a low frequency and high frequency EQ, and the 3 channels were Normal, Brilliance, which is the top boost channel, and the Vibrabox, which actually had a built-in vibrato. Now this is the amplifier that Brian May and most guitar players that have a lot of money are after. And that brings us back to Queen. Brian May actually owns a lot of 1964 Vox AC30s, and he's modified them a lot throughout the years. Back in Smile and in the early Queen albums, he actually used the Celestion Greenback speakers, but in the 80s he actually switched to the Blue Alnico speakers. Personally, I actually like the Greenback speakers a lot better because they break faster. That means that they actually get distortion at lower volumes, and they are not as bright and chimey as the Blue Alnicos. Another thing that's very important in Brian May's tone is the treble booster. Now imagine this, the amplifier by itself is a very loud, very bright amplifier. If you go onto the top boost channel, you actually get a boost on the high frequencies too, so now you have an even brighter amplifier. And now he actually uses a treble booster to push that preamp even harder on the high frequencies. So you get a ton of push, compression and distortion on the top end, but you really don't get a lot of low end. That makes the bass be a lot tighter and the top a lot more distorted. That, along with the guitar and the out-of-phase pickup configurations, it's what makes Brian May's guitar really scream. Okay, so the 1964 Vox AC30 is a gem. It truly is a marvel of engineering. I never had a chance to play one, but everybody says that it's the best, and if it's good enough for Brian May, then it's good enough for the rest of us mortals. But the 1964 AC30 is still a tube amp, and it's still a fragile amp. So Brian May actually strips off all of his AC30s down to one volume knob, because he caught on to the fact very early on that the more components that an amplifier had, the more things that are prone to breaking during a tour. And get this, Vox actually made a Brian May signature amplifier that only has that one volume knob. Now that's a bold move. So you could only sound like Brian May, only louder. That's awesome. Okay, so in 1994, Korg actually bought out Vox, so they have owned Vox ever since. And in 2003, they actually moved some of the production to China. So you get the Custom Classics, the C1, and a lot more models that are Chinese made. But they're actually pretty good still. The cheaper solid state ones are really not that good, but the tube ones really are. Of course, they're not the same as the ones made in the UK, but they are still pretty damn good. Of course, if you want the real high-end ones, you can still get some UK-made ones. Many years after selling to Korg, Jennings actually started making their own amplifiers again, based on the true spirit of the AC30s. But sadly, they just didn't sell as much as the actual Voxes. Okay guys, so I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Drop me a like, drop me a comment, you know the drill. Subscribe to this channel like your man if you haven't yet. And please consider becoming a member by hitting the join button down there. I will see you guys next time. Pat out, metal on dudes.